Welcome to Third Perspective, a show dedicated to examining divisive and complex social and cultural problems, letting the truth moderate. Today's topic is going to be abortion, so strap yourselves in. This is going to be an enlightening ride. Today on Third Perspective, we're going to be talking about an emotionally charged issue called abortion, or the termination of a pregnancy, typically by legal means, at least here in the United States. There are two typical camps that most people tend to fall into. Now, I'm not talking about the apathetic group of people, the people that are more neutral, but rather most people have a strong pro-opinion on pro-choice or pro-life. So let's examine some of their arguments and, as always, let the truth moderate. Pro-life says that life begins at conception, essentially when a spermatozoid and an ova connect in the fallopian tube before it gets to the uterus and attaches to the uterine wall. It is life. It is a human life, and therefore should be protected by human rights and human laws. The pro-choice says it is my body, and this body is something that you shall not infringe upon. A very libertarian / democratic viewpoint. So let's examine, first and foremost, the basic of their premise. Number one, pro-choice says that life begins, for the sake of argument, at birth. So up until birth, the pregnancy can be aborted by the mother. There are some places where you can do a very, 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 very late-term abortion. In other places, like Alabama recently, they identify something on the opposite side of the spectrum, which is to say that life begins at conception. Life begins when that both of those reproductive cells combine and make a zygote. And once they do, they start to rapidly expand and divide and become a human body. So those are your two typical camps right now. One says, yes, life begins at conception. The other one says life begins at birth. So what's the third perspective? The third perspective is a metaphysical perspective, and it simply states that life doesn't begin. Life simply is. So if you can reach that level of understanding, then all of a sudden, the debate, as it's framed as life begins here, it looks slightly different. Instead of just two opposing forces, it's got to be either or. You now see a third element. And that third element is that life is eternal. Yes, there are births, and yes, there are deaths. But life itself is eternal. So the third perspective here is going to support the pro-choice component and say that, well, life is eternal. And it doesn't, quote-unquote, begin at conception. But before the pro-choicers erupt in celebrations that I have determined through metaphysical law that they are right in this assessment, let's look at one of the other arguments. One of the arguments of pro-choice is that it's my body, and so therefore I have the right to terminate it. Well, unfortunately, the pro-life position, which is that it's not your body, is the scientifically valid perspective. The human body that is within the uterus, that is attached to the uterine wall, that is now growing in a very small placenta in the beginning, is not yours alone. In fact, there has to be a father, somebody that provided the genetic code to match your genetic code, and those two matched up in some sort of chance-based arrangement. In other words, that the body that is within your body, even though it's minute and smaller than a grain of rice in the beginning, it is no longer your body. There is something foreign that came in through your vaginal canal. Wonder how that happened. And then at that point, there was a blending of the two. The two became one, and that one is now something different. So pro-life is actually wrong here. It is no longer your body. In cases of rape and incest, it still makes sense from the third perspective to have the right to terminate a early pregnancy. Basically, as long as you're within the first trimester, you have or should have that right to terminate that pregnancy because, for the first 6 weeks, you may not even know you're pregnant. Should after 4 weeks, but, at being around women, their schedules and their menstrual cycle isn't always regular. It can be affected by stress and other factors. So, even though the third perspective, again, says that life is eternal, and so therefore this pregnancy can be terminated under this premises, the pro-life position is going to be accurate in saying, well, it is not just your body. So if this was consensual sex, not talking about the rape or the incest, which maybe even incest could be consensual, but that depends on circumstance to circumstance, and then that's a whole nother discussion. But if this is consensual sex and the woman is aware that she is pregnant and she has not informed the father that she is pregnant, then this is a break in trust from the metaphysical perspective. In fact, this is where a person that is going to get an abortion may create some sort of karmic repercussions, because the father, the one that engaged in this consensual act, has just as much at stake. Now, you could say that the first 9 months of what's at stake is going to be heavily burdened on the mother, and I would agree with that, and I think most metaphysicians would agree with that as well. However, the life that is growing within, or the body that is growing within, is something that a soul will at some point attach itself to, if that is agreeable to a soul that is observing this particular situation. So that's a long way of saying that the husband, or husband, I guess I have some traditional values, the man who impregnated the woman should be informed, and it should be a decision based upon both of them whether or not to terminate the pregnancy. And if not, and if the woman goes against the man's wishes, or the man says he's all in and then disappears in 3 weeks and leaves the woman by herself, well, he's kind of given his answer. But if the man is seriously there and wanting to support her and help her and help the baby carry through, if the woman doesn't listen to his particular desires, then that will create karmic repercussions to the man. We haven't even got to the third and most powerful metaphysical argument of this debate. So let's jump right in. The third argument is that pro-life says it is murder to kill a embryo or a fetus, or even take an Ellie pill and the morning after pill or whatever they call that. And that is the position of pro-life. As we've talked about before, life is eternal. They are correct that conception is the beginning of a sequence that will lead to birth. They are correct that way. But here's the really important third perspective. You and I are eternal. Our souls are immortal. We have been around since the beginning of existence, and we will continue through all of existence. Therefore, no man, no woman, no act of nature, no act of God can destroy the essence that is you. The body is a different ballgame altogether. The body can be destroyed. The body, in fact, will be destroyed from ashes to ashes, or dust to dust, whatever you want to call it. But what does that mean as it relates to abortion? It means that you cannot murder somebody who has not been born, because being born is a significant event where a soul in the inner levels of consciousness comes to the earth plane and anchors and embeds his or her consciousness into a physical form. That is what we call birth. In other words, when there is an entity in the inner levels, they have chosen a vehicle for an experience on the earth plane. They choose the vehicle, and that vehicle is not aborted throughout the whole pregnancy. In other words, the person carries it, the woman carries it to full term. When that woman pushes the body through the birth canal, and all of a sudden the little body itself has to take care of itself. In other words, when the umbilical cord is gone, that is usually the indication for the soul to enter the body and to take over the functioning of the body. When the soul has made that choice to take over the functioning of the body is quote unquote born. The consciousness is now firmly placed into that physical little baby. And now the only way for that consciousness to leave permanently and go back into the inner levels of death, or inner levels of mind, is death. So that's where it would become murder. When the soul has not committed to the body and hasn't fully anchored himself or herself. I know we're talking souls, but it's still, one's going to have more of an aggressive energy and the other's going to have more of a feminine energy. In any case, when they come into that body and they anchor in, the only way that they can leave permanently is through death. That is when a body is quote unquote born, and a soul has been born into the physical existence. So this means that while the fetus is developing in the placenta inside the woman's uterus, the soul can visit the body, go in and experience the body, but they're not yet committed to it because they don't have to keep it alive through intelligence. In other words, they don't need to have all the vital organs functioning through their cosmic connection to the divine. They can go in and out because the woman, their mother, is taking care of the body as it's developing. So they can come in and out as they please for specific experiences. Sometimes they want to see and experience what their mother and father are going through, so they go into the body. Other times they're floating around. Parents who are more psychic may have also noticed this or recognized this, that when a soul chooses the body that's developing inside as an embryo or a fetus, or whatever time the individual, the soul, has chosen this body, they may notice the presence of their soon-to-be child. So that should tell them that, hey, this child, if I do end up aborting this body, is going to be fine. There still may be karmic repercussions for any choice that you make, including abortion. So abortion, even though the third perspective says abortion is acceptable, there are ramifications for the abortion itself. One of the few women I know that has told me of an abortion she had was in her 30s, and she was super bummed, super lamenting and suffering, a state of suffering, that she prevented herself from having an experience as a mother. She was young, she was at the age of 16, but here she was in her upper 30s and still without a child. So she really regretted the experience, and so that would be a karmic repercussions. But as far as the legal code goes and the society goes, to harmonize with the third perspective, to harmonize with metaphysical law, we must recognize that life is eternal, and that abortion does have consequences, and those consequences are both a mixture of good and evil. The further you get in the term of your pregnancy, the more repercussions there come from aborting it. More energy is invested in it, and therefore also on a hormonal level could really affect you. Early on pregnancy is less repercussions, and based upon your understanding of your life and where you're going, early on abortion makes more sense than late-term abortion. Even if a person doesn't realize or think that they have the capacity to take care of this entity that's coming into the earth, there's always the ability to let go to adoption. So, as a huge summary of a summary of a summary, there are components of pro-life that are accurate. Pro-life recognizes that the body that's within the woman's body is not purely the woman's body. So the man, the father, should have some say. If the father proves to be irresponsible, that's him basically relinquishing his responsibility. The pro-choice has some truth in the sense that it is not murder because the soul has not yet committed to the body, has not been anchored into the body. And so this gets away of like Ben Shapiro's argument of saying like, oh, well, somebody that is not able to breathe by themselves should just be killed because, if abortion is, say, that you have to be born and breathe your first breath before you're alive, that person can't do it by themselves, so we can kill them and it will not be considered murder because they're not a person. The distinguishing characteristic is that person that is on that breathalyzer, or not the breathalyzer, but the machine that breathes for them, that person has already committed and anchored themselves into the body. Now, assisted suicide and letting people die naturally, a different debate. But the whole point of what I'm trying to point here is pro-choice is right. It is not murder because the soul has not anchored themselves into the body. And so, the third perspective says abortion should be legal. Abortion is metaphysically correct in some circumstances. But in any choice you make, including abortion, there will be consequences. So, be very mindful of the choices you make. Hope you've enjoyed this video. This is Rory Colgan from The Third Perspective. Wishing you well, and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.